Hello, and welcome to a special limited edition and very small version of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are giving you a bonus episode to set you up for a special interview next week. Now,
in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah. A week and a half, whatever. It's all so far from when we're recording this that
it's a bonus episode to set up another bonus episode. That's what it comes down to.
Yes. So, a little bit about where this came from. At the Cincinnati Comic Expo in 2023, Alex and I walk around in our Storied Arcs t-shirts, which usually gets us a few conversations. This year in particular, there were a couple people that I was meeting up with that I hadn't met before, but they knew to look for the podcast logo. So I was like, yeah, it's not too dorky to wear your own shirt. So I'll do it. And I think even worse, we went to Lexington and we were both wearing khakis that day. And it was like, oh boy, now it's a company uniform.
Yeah. It wasn't great.
It's a tough look, but
we got to plan that better.
All that to say, I was walking past one of the exhibitor tables, and the woman working at the table said, like, what is your shirt about? I love story. I was like, oh, that's my podcast. She was like, so you guys like talk about like dissecting story arcs? And I was like, yeah, I mean, not like that explicitly, but also, yes, like we talk about it one trade at a time, going through indie and creator-owned comics. And she was like, I love talking about that kind of stuff. I started my book series and mapped out all 12 books before I started the first chapter of the first book. And I love, plotting things out and the architecture and how things connect. And we really hit it off talking for a little bit. And I was like, yeah, what the heck? I'll try one of your books. And this person's name was Lydia Sherrer, spelled Sherrer. And that was Friday at the Cincinnati Comic Expo. I purchased book one and Cat Magic, which we'll get into what these books are, and went home and read for a couple hours Friday night. And I was like, okay, I'm in. I went back on Saturday and I was like, give me, just the rest of the series. Like I need all of it now so that I can, because I know I'm going to tear through this. And she was like, I'm so glad you liked it. And she was like, and if you ever want to talk on your podcast, I would love to do that. And I was like, I could tell talking to her, I was like, that would be a really great conversation. I'm just not sure how I could kind of fudge it on a comic podcast. But then, lo and behold, January this year, she announced that she will be working on a graphic novel or comic adaptation of her books. And I was like, bingo, that's our ticket in. So this is a conversation that I've really wanted to have for like half a year now. And I think we finally found our rationalization. So we are not discussing a comic creator yet, but someone who is like a world builder, storyteller, moving into sequential comic art. And it's actually a really interesting time to interview somebody. I think there have been a lot of artists or creators in that situation that I would have loved to hear their thoughts about moving into the medium before they ever put pen to paper.
Well, and I think it's interesting too when you hear our conversation with Lydia. She's someone that doesn't have a ton of experience with comics, either as a reader or in the industry at all. So it's someone who is really taken kind of her career as a prose writer and really hands-on, really has a sense of not just the creative side, but as you'll hear, really on the kind of business entrepreneur side to the point of at times maybe even being like, this is just like cold hard capitalism. Like you got to make money to put food on the table for a family, which is on some way it's a refreshing way to look at it. But knowing that she also has the deep ties to the artistic side of storytelling, the idea that she understands she's got to put these books out. They have to sell. Like she's got to make money because this isn't just for fun. But so she has that kind of grind to her. She has that kind of get down. And then to see her now see an opportunity to maybe help expand her base, her readership by moving into comics and taking that step, that those initial steps into that world, without having any real experience in it without having any guidelines in. So I agree. I think it's an interesting time to talk to someone as they work through trying to navigate a different kind of publishing, a different kind of world, a different kind of setup. It's got its own rules. It has its own markers for success. You know, it has this whole different business model than books do. And so that was an interesting part of the conversation that we definitely get into. But our talk with Lydia isn't just about that. So much of it is a much broader sense. Like you talked about that initial meeting of talking about world building and story creation and story crafting and all of that, and all the work that goes into building a world to tell a story in. And so much of our talk is going to cover that. And we should say right now that of the book she's written, we're focusing on one main series, which is her main series, which is the Lily Singer adventures, which is the Love Lies and Hocus Pocus colon whatever the subtitle is. And
Right.
there are, as we're recording this now, there are 8 books. The 8th book just came out a few weeks ago, plus 3 novellas. And obviously we don't expect everybody to have read those books, all of them, or maybe even some of them, by the time our interview with Lydia comes out. So we do want to make it clear that we're not talking about the books much in the same way when we discuss any of our trades. We're not sitting down and recapping the plot. Obviously, the plot comes up when we talk about the various themes or storytelling choices that are made on the page, but we're not sitting. We do assume you've read the book, those comics, but we're not recapping them. Our conversation with Lydia is going to work under the assumption that it works even if you haven't read her specific books, but maybe if you've read books at all, like if you read any sort of ongoing series,
Right.
like
Or I mean, let's just say if you've read Harry Potter, if you
true.
like
Yeah.
urban fantasy and magic.
Well, but I think it's broader than that. If you've read any
Oh yeah.
ongoing series that relies on starting and having a hook and getting invested into multiple volumes, any sort of prose like that, because that's the kind of world she's building and the kind of things that she has to, and any kind of author like that has to navigate, right? They have to present the story, the characters and the world and the stakes of that, and have to hook the readers and keep them on the hook to keep reading the story. So how and when you disperse information or expand the world or contract the world, whatever you're doing to keep the readers their interest, but also to keep to whatever your overall stories you're trying to tell. And so our conversation is about that. And I think one thing we say early on or somewhere in the interview is, you know, whether it's prose storytelling or sequential art storytelling, like stories are stories. And whether you're building as an author, just as a prose author, writing things out, or you're working with a creative team like an artist and colorist and an editor and things like that, storytelling is storytelling. And so we want to prime people on what they're going to listen to. Obviously we would love for you to go and read these books. I think Mike and I both, Mike obviously made the initial meeting with Lydia and started reading these books, and you gave them out to family members too, right?
Yeah, so I got my father-in-law hooked on them. I got my sister-in-law reading them. My wife has read. So this is actually a great segue. Because my wife read the first one and wasn't hooked immediately, and was like, "Well, I got other things, from the library that I want to read, so I'll pick up book 2 when I get to it." And that was a couple months ago, and so I'm really pushing her. I'm like, "I promise you, if you read book 2, you're going to read through book 8. And so I think since that's what I've told multiple other people,
including
and my
me.
wife and
including
you,
me. Yeah.
including
Yeah.
you, that will be my suggestion to the listener is,
Yeah.
if you're going to dip your toe in for 2 books.
Yeah.
If by the end of book 2, you're still not feeling anything at all for the world, the characters, whatever, that's
Then
fair.
yeah.
You just
Yeah.
pass on it.
I
But
agree.
I'd be stunned if the average story reader didn't find something to draw them in by the end of book 2.
I agree 100%. And when Mike told me that, there's some trepidation because, you get recommendations like that. Like when anyone when you tell anyone to watch something like The Wire. You're like, you just get through like I think it's like 6 episodes. So you just told someone to commit like 6 hours before they decided this is good or not. Like that's all.
Oh
It
yeah,
can be
it's
a
like
hard. It's a hard ask.
when
It's a hard.
someone was trying to get me into the
Yeah.
Fast and Furious franchise. I was like, this was like when seven was out or something, and I hadn't seen
Yeah.
any of them.
I
And
mean, five's the
and,
best. Yeah.
well, and somebody was like, I was like trying to be nice about it, but I was like, this movie seemed like they're trash. I was like, well, I'm sure like the first one must have been great, which is how you get all these sequels. He was like, oh, actually, no, like
No.
first one's
No.
really bad.
Nah, the first
And
one's better. I
and then
mean,
he was like,
two's
but the
bad.
second
Three is
one,
bad.
he's like, no, but the third one also not good.
Yeah.
And, like I'm trying to remember, there is a Parks and Rec quote where Andy is talking about, oh boy, what were the Expendables movies? Where he
Oh
said,
yeah. Yeah.
he said,
Yeah.
if you watch the second time you watch Expendables 2, it's still bad, but the third time you watch it and the fourth time you're like, it's not a good movie. Uh,
So,
no,
it
but
is a big ask. But I think I said,
however,
I want
these
to,
are short books, especially on the front end.
and yeah, the first book is the shortest, so you can get through it very quickly. So, if the name Lydia Sherrer, you go look it up and you see these books and the descriptions seem like something that you would want to get into again, which is not a prerequisite to listen to our interview coming up. But again, we want to support all kinds of creators, writers, artists, whatever they're doing in their endeavors. So if you do want to go after and start reading these books, I agree you have to get it too, because I even told Mike, like, I read that first one, or well, we'll get to how I listened to all the audiobooks. I didn't have time to actually read them. Audiobooks are fantastic, but I listened to the first one, and my honest opinion was there's a lot of good stuff there, but I have, if I weren't committed to listening to two, so I could at least have been involved in our conversation with Lydia, I don't know if I would have kept going, much like your wife. But I did. I stuck it out and I listened to two because I committed to two. And by the time we got into like the second half of that second book, I mean, really, it starts ramping up. But as I was finishing the second book, I was like, well, like I'm listening on my phone. I'm going through like, well, like might as well go and get the rest of these right now. Like the second book's not even done yet, and I already know I'm now in, which is completely different than where I was at the beginning. And what is really interesting, to tease something in our conversation coming up with Lydia, is that she's aware of this kind of phenomena, and we'll let her talk about it. But this idea of that first book, maybe her goals of what she thought the story might have been or what it was initially going to be, the actual story didn't change, but maybe some of the storytelling choices did. Some of her aims changed a little bit, from book one to book two, and further on. And that was really fascinating to talk about because she is aware of that sort of reaction to the first book. And I want to say that, again, I don't think it has anything to do with content. I think it has everything to do with story setup. Where I finished that first book, and I didn't know where the story was going. And it's not that I need a cliffhanger. You don't have to do the big cliffhanger reveal at every story, but I have to feel at the end of a story when I know it's the first of 7, 8 books, or I guess ultimately 12 books. There's got to be some sort of setup, right? Like, what's the hook at the end of one to keep you reading it two? And I just didn't find that. I didn't connect to it. But at the end of book two, I sure as hell connected to it, knowing where three would go, and then from there on, like I'm in. So yeah, if you are going to dip your toe in, and we definitely recommend that you do, commit to two, because you're right, Mike. If you get to two and you're still out, you know what? So be it. That's fine.
I say the same thing with all the comics we do on this podcast. I'm like,
it's fine to drop. It's fine to stop.
I think I actually said the same
there's
about.
something else out there for you to like. It's fine.
I said the same about The Unwritten to someone who I know only listens to our podcast when they're following along. They'll just sit out a season or two, and it's like, that's fine. That's literally what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about this Unwritten. I was like, read 2 trades and do so in as short a span of time as you can. Get some momentum going because it's a big world.
Yeah.
And constantly expanding. And I said, if by the end you get to two, and I knew what the last issue was in volume two,
Mhm.
which is like if you don't like, the rabbit character, then
Yeah, 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 yeah,
you're just gonna be out on this series, and that's fine.
yeah. Exactly,
Um,
exactly, and that's the important thing. That's fine. If you start something and it's not for you, it's not a comment on your character or your tastes or whatnot. Yeah, yeah, but I you got to give it a chance. You got to give it a fair chance. Come at it, come at it with an open mind. Come at it, um, uh, willingly. And yeah, if you get to the end of that second book and it's not for you, it's not for you. It's fine. It's fine. But I know you and I at that point were totally locked in. And I mean, from the moment this we started talking to Lydia about doing this interview to when we actually did it was about 3 weeks. And I had not like we had I think you had reached out and we had scheduled it, and you were like, release the first two books just so you have some knowledge. And I was like, fine, I'll do that. In the 3 weeks from when that you told me to send you sent that first text, tell me to do that to when we actually recorded the interview with Lydia. I listened to all 8 books, read the first little like 60, 70 page novella, which is free. You can go find that one. It's called A Study in Mischief. And listen to the 2 other novellas, Cat Magic and Cat Mischief, which amounted to 102 hours of audio book listening. I did all that in about 3 weeks. I tore through these because they're wonderful listens. And
four and a
and
half, 4.25 days listening.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but well, okay. So let's also say just a little shout out to Amy McFadden, whose work I know from other audiobooks. This is a
Mhm.
proper actor and an
Yeah,
audiobook
yeah.
narrator.
Hmm.
I listened to her work on The Paper Magician, which was a trilogy plus one, um, and like a fourth book, not following the same characters but in the same world type situation. She narrated all those, and I thought her performance is really great. In fact, I think it might even be propping up the book a little bit by the time I got to the end of that series. And when I like listened to the preview of Love Lies and Hocus Pocus on Hoopla, which by the way, your public library probably has these on Hoopla for you to listen to for free
Yeah,
if
they
you
they
like really want to listen and you can't give any money to an indie artist.
yeah,
And I don't mean that in a shaming way, but like,
yeah. Public libraries are great. Support them as well. I know I got a couple of them from the library. A couple of them are on Audible. The eighth book, which was just released, will eventually make their way to those various platforms. I was in a position where I didn't want to wait, and so I bought that directly from Lydia's site through the Book Funnel app. But no, I want to second that. I thought um, Amy was incredible. And it started off slow for me in that first book. And I think it was because I didn't connect with the story. And the world is so much smaller in that first book. I think as the world grows, as any sort of series like this is, the world expands, the characters expand, and she has to do so much more. And obviously a lot of this is voice work and character work and things like that. Um, I think she really shines as the books get more complex, they get longer. More things are asked of her, but she's really, really great, really, really
well,
fantastic.
I
It's a
think
really good listen.
she really shines on the Cat Mischief and Cat Magic books, which, by the way, there is a hilarious YouTube video of her outtakes from those books
Oh, I need to watch
because
that. I didn't know about that. Oh,
yeah,
I got to
it
fire that up
yeah, no,
later.
it's like uh I guess mild spoiler, which is not that big of a spoiler if you like go to the Love Lies and Hocus Pocus like Facebook groups or anything like that. There is eventually in the series a talking cat, and
Yeah,
the side adventure books follow the talking cat, and he's like very pompous and cat like and says ridiculous things in a very self-serious way. And Amy McFadden was just like losing it, trying to say like certain sentences. So very, very
oh,
fun.
we should say also like a main character in the main books as well. Like
Right, right, yes.
not only in the side novellas, also critically important to the story. But those two novellas, Cat Magic and Cat Mischief, the cat is the main character there. Though I guess you'd probably say he was the main character in the main series books too. But
I would, yes. He's yeah, certainly my favorite character in all the books. But so anyway, there are 8 books. The 2 cat novellas, The Study of Mischief, and then another trilogy spawning out of this, which only the first book is out yet, which follows one of the co-stars of the series. I was going to call him a supporting character, which I guess technically he is, but the breakdown of these books, this is not a spoiler to say. Each book has essentially 2 episodes and an interlude.
Yeah.
And you get a POV switch for the interlude every time.
Yeah. There's a first half, an interlude, a second half. And early on, the first 2 halves are like they're effectively separate stories, right? It's much more episodic. And I think
it's
that's
like watching a new TV show.
Yeah, it's very procedural. It's very procedural in that nature, and that there's a first half, then there's an interlude, say we switch POVs, and then there's a second half, a second episode. And I think that's why I didn't connect so much early on. But once you start getting really after the second book, from the second half, the first 2 halves. Sorry, the first 2 halves. The hell does that mean? The first half of book 2 connects more to the second half of book 2 than it does in book 1. And then from there, in the rest of the books, you really feel like you're following one story. It's one continuous story, and it kind of veers away from this more episodic nature. There are kind of side quest things, to use that terminology, to borrow that terminology, to the overall story, but it's very clear that you're still on the main story. Any sort of sojourns and diversions for either the interlude or one of the chapters are all in service of the overall main story, the main through line, which you become aware of in and after book 2 that doesn't exist in book 1. And I think that's where a big part of where my disconnect comes from that first one. So if you're looking for, knowing this is a long running book series that still has 4 books to go, I was looking for that through line. And so once I got it and caught onto it and latched onto it, I was in for the ride. But in that first book, when it is more episodic, it is very, here's something that happens, another thing happens, here's a second thing that happens, and the book's over. And there's a lot of, there's not a whole lot of narrative connectivity to it. It feels more disjointed. So the nature of the books, the way that she has them set up, it lends to that kind of episodic nature, that episodic storytelling. But yeah, so if that had been the whole series, I don't know if that's something that I would have been interested in. So once it became a little more serialized, a little more connected, that's where I latched on. But even on those later books, right, when you are reading one continuous storyline, you still get the breakdown of opening part, POV switch in the interlude, and then back to the second part. You're still getting those breakdowns. That story structure still exists, it has a nice break in the storytelling, right? Because that POV switch gives you different perspectives. It allows her to write in a different voice, and it gives the characters and it gives the reader different perspectives. So all that stuff still really flows, keeping that same structure. But the narrative, I think, becomes clearer in those later books in terms of what the overall arc of the entire series is going to be.
Yeah, and you can really see it emerge by the end of the second book. I mean, it hasn't taken full form, and you're still like,
but you can see the start.
Books.
It's clear. Right. It's clear where the start is. By the time you finish book 2, it's clear what the trajectory is going to be. All the specifics are obviously to be revealed, but there's a much clearer path after book 2 than there is at the end of book 1. Because I don't think there's any clear path. I don't think there's any path at all visible at the end of book 1 that the reader could latch onto. But yeah, that structure is something she holds to all the way through. She uses that same 2-act plus interlude structure in all the books.
Yeah. So her selling point for the series, which is the final thing I'll say about it, is urban fantasy, which is I'm all about that. It exists in a modified version of our world. It's set in Atlanta. It's set in Atlanta.
Sets in. They go to real places. She references real locations. So yeah, it's our world, a version of our world that exists.
Uh, Second tag is snarky humor, which I would say is
Yeah,
consistent throughout, but much more like they aren't comedy books, but you will find yourself chuckling as you
yeah,
read them. And then the cat books, I would say, are comedy forward.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, well, I think you're supposed to find the things that the talking cat does to be funny. Like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're meant to
But
be like
but
he's meant
that's
to
more an
be
accent on the
ostentatious.
story
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
rather than like it's a comedy about a talking cat.
Yes,
Um
very, very true. It is not about the talking cat. He is a major factor to the story and is an important character. And a lot of the things he says, his attitude, all of that are intentionally funny. But you're right, it's not, it isn't um she doesn't shift the book to be about him.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
So there's urban fantasy, snarky humor, and the final category, which I gotta say is a little bit of a speed bump for me usually, is it says slow burn romance. And
yeah.
I would say I am not a fan of romance as a genre. I do not seek it out. One may even say I actively avoid it. That said, and by the way, that series, The Paper Magician, that I may have incidentally slandered earlier, um,
May
nothing
have
wrong
caught
with
some
it.
strays.
It was just romance forward.
Yeah.
Like it was a romance in a magical world,
Mhm.
and I wanted the magical world, and the romance was getting in my way of the view of the world. Is basically the best way I can think to say it. I would describe the slow burn romance in if you think the slow burn romance between Han and Leia in like Empire Strikes Back is like
Yeah.
too gushy a romance for you,
Yeah.
then these might be too. But if that, I would say that's about the level, right? It's like here's two characters who are clearly drawn to each other, but
I,
it's not just them sitting around looking into each other's eyes for long scenes.
I will say the the speed at which we see Han and Leia move is like a cheetah relative
That's
to
true.
our characters here.
Now, that
Which
could be
again,
that
that
you binged 102 hours of audiobooks in 3 weeks.
it is, but it's
If you were
still
reading this over the course of years, it'd be a slower
it's
burn.
even like I said, I mean, even going through it as fast as I did, it was still incredibly slow. But I think that does bring up an aspect that is not something that we talk about when we got to talk to Lydia, is that this is a book that is, I mean, we talk about what age range these stories fall into. I mean, it's suitable for a YA audience, middle school and up, probably very much so. But it doesn't feature characters that are that age. It features characters that are older. But it is a story. It's a story about adults, but it's not like a quote unquote adult story. Like it's not some grim and gritty kind of dirty magic story kind of thing. It's not like The Magicians. If you read the Lev Grossman book,
I did.
which
Yeah.
which are fantastic, and I love those. This is not that. It is still it has an all ages YA feel to it. There are stakes. There are danger. There are danger. The hell is that? There is danger in the story. That there are serious moments, there are absurd funny moments, but it does have a wider audience appeal, I guess, than maybe you would guess, for if you said this is a book about two magical users in their 20s, that fight off, spoilers, evil forces, you know um
Big spoiler.
yeah,
Yeah.
they have to fight
Um,
evil guys. Sorry. It's a story about magic users, and you know what? There are people who use magic for good, people who use magic for bad. I'm
oh
sorry, I
my gosh. I feel like you
destroyed the whole
just
series for
ruined
you.
ruined
I
the
ruined
first
everything.
four books.
I ruined everything. It's terrible. But yeah, so there is a young adult vibe to the stories, again, which is not meant to be as a pejorative, but it is meant to. It's a factual state. It's descriptive in terms of the level of what the audience is, or what it could cater to. But I think it can be enjoyed. There are elements to be enjoyed, I think, on all levels. Because I'm with you, the slow burn romance, because it is like you read like their first interactions in the book, and you're like, well, I know where this is going. It's just a matter of when. So yeah, that stuff. Not that I bump against it, but it personally, I don't care that much. But when
No,
she
it's more
gets
one of
it,
those things where I'm like, I don't need it, but if it's
yeah,
done well, I can appreciate it.
yeah. Well, and the times when that dovetails into um actual plot mechanics, when their relationship and the specific point they are in the relationship, when that dovetails into what's happening in the story and have it and how it matters, that stuff I'm totally cool with. Um, but yeah, I mean, for me, I liked it when she starts to get kind of pretty granular about the lore that she has built. The way that magic works and the way that magic exists in her universe that she's created. When it gets real kind of inside baseball-y stuff, that's the kind of stuff that drew me in. So it has that level to it as well, where she's describing magic and magical objects and the way the source of magic, how people use it and engage with it. The way she describes and builds all that. It's not Tolkien level because Tolkien is Tolkien, obviously, but there is thought and consideration in every aspect that she puts into her story, which I think is really great. And again, it's the thing that I hook on to, beyond the characters or the actual specific narrative in the story. I like those details, and so all those things are there. So it does have it is open to a wide appeal, to a fairly large audience.
Yes. So if you trust us at all, check out the first two books.
Yeah.
Audiobook probably no more than 20 hours between the two of them, something like
Yeah,
that.
the first two books would get you, yeah, about 15 hours.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, 15
Yeah.
hours, that's like less than a month of podcasts for the average American. So,
Yeah.
just sideline other podcasts, not this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just bench those for a couple weeks. Check out some incredible books, and I really hope whether you've read them all or none that you tune in for next week's our upcoming discussion,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
is going to be
Yeah.
well, we've already recorded it.
Yeah.
It's our longest interview by a long
It's
shot.
it's very long, yeah, but it gets, again, we get into the mechanics of story creation and storytelling. So again, without any specific spoilers about these books, about the Love Lies and Hocus Pocus books. So again, you don't have to know what's going on in those stories. We reference things vaguely, but we talk about in things of like the protagonist or the antagonist. Very general things, because we wanted to get at the heart of what Lydia's creative process was and how she worked and how she created and crafted stories, which is a process that we're interested in, you and I, Mike, regardless of if it's a prose novel, a graphic novel, um, television, movies, or whatever it is. I think the creative process to develop stories is something that we just like. We just happen to focus on comics, and so getting to talk to someone who works in the prose realm but is still thinking about the same things, it's just the kind of choices you have to make. Or do I have 14 pages of block text as I describe this tree? Hello, Mr. Tolkien. Or do I trust an artist to draw one big nice half splash page of this tree? The choices are different. The end result is different, but you still have to make those choices, and the process in which you reach those decisions, I think, is something that fascinates and interests us. And talking to Lydia and getting into her mind about that, was really really fun and really 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 great. And yes, it is a very long episode, so be forewarned. Maybe you got to stop in the middle, take a break, come back to it a little bit later.
Yeah. I'm actually, I will confess, I don't always or even usually listen to our podcast because I already heard it when we recorded it, and usually a good chunk of it again when I edit it. This one I will be listening to again for Lydia, not to hear myself talk. But Lydia just has so many great insights on story. She's extroverted,
Yeah,
and uh, she is just, you wonder like how can a person write so many books since like 2016? It's like 8 years, and it's like 10, 11 books,
yeah,
and it's like, oh, she's just like a fountain of story
yeah,
and knowledge and wisdom, and it's just all starts pouring out.
yeah.
So I'm just eager
Well,
to hear that all
yeah,
again.
indeed. You'll hear her say early on that, Story is how she processes the world. So whether or not it's creating her stories or anything, simply her dealing and existing in the world, she processes that through story and storytelling. So that makes an awful lot of sense when you listen to her, and hear her speak, hear her insights on what goes into her stories, and that this is just what she does. This is how she operates. Whether we would be talking to her for an interview, or you talk to her at a convention, or if you, I don't know, ran into her at the grocery store or something like that. I think this is the person you would get, and how she thinks and how she sees the world. So we hope you listen to that. We understand if it'll take multiple listens, multiple sittings to get through it, because it was very long, but it was a really, really wonderful talk. So,
all right, we'll see you next week.
Peace.